Alright, the last report is here, so let's sum it up then. How do we stand in this war? Militarily speaking, our Phalanx patrols reported over 200 incursions into our territory, mostly from Yanari's base. Nothing major, mostly scouts and patrol vessels similar to ours, but it led to some skirmishes between our forces. Phalanx reports they won most of them, and they even managed to capture some prisoners that are now being transferred for processing, but unfortunately, despite all efforts to prevent it, they also lost a number of good pilots. And while we don't have a solid confirmation, we should assume that some of our people have also fallen into enemy hands. Fortunately, these patrols only receive need-to-know information from the HQ, so we shouldn't have any major breaches in our internal security. Still, I doubt that it will help our captured pilots. Some of the officers in Naval Command proposed a rescue operation, but it would be like searching for a needle in a haystack. By now, Yanari probably moved prisoners deeper into their territory, and even if they didn't, they would still be searching blindly, since we have almost no data about their space. It's a shame, but the only thing we can do for these people is to actually win the war and demand their return, if they'll even be alive by then. But back to reports. In the north, Yadrans are testing out defenses as well, but their operations are, for now, restricted to Mezaka system. Fortunately, our patrols managed to keep them at bay, but the weirdest part is the report about Zrakan border, since they are completely silent. We have no reports of even a single enemy contact, and some of our scouts we sent into their border systems claim that they are completely deserted. They even stopped broadcasting their never-ending preaching transmission. I heard about that. Naval Command says that they went into a full comm silence to mask their movements. Hopefully, this time our scouts will find them before they sneak into the middle of our space. That all on your end? Okay then, as for me, I just finalized transfer of Quadrillion vessels into our fleet. It was a bit odd to tour a ship built by another race. All the corners are off, not to mention that everything was built for Marines who only have 3 fingers. Still, I have a good feeling about them. Our officers worried that Quadrillions may be too green, but after short presentation of their skills, they changed their tune. Turns out Commodore Ironbark and his people are natural at maneuvering in space. Speaking of which, have you called our new admiral? No, not yet. It's hard to find enough time between all my responsibilities. Sure it is. Only thing is you used that same excuse yesterday, and the day before that. Look, I can clearly tell something is bothering you, but we really don't have time for drama right now, so how about you just tell me what it is? You have a problem with Captain of CSV Ruby being appointed as a new commander of Manticore? No, her test results speak for themselves, and of course I know from my own experience that she's a good officer. It's just that she and I, well, she was one of the most vocal opponents of many of my decisions, like implementing psionics in our fleet. She tried to undermine your authority? No, of course not. For all our differences, I admit that she is very good at her job, and even when she disagreed, she followed orders. But that's not just it. Truth is, I'm worried about her methods. Sure, she's good and focused on her goal, but she takes that to the extreme. You know, she used to have a husband in the fleet. He was just a grunt engineer, so in order to avoid any conflicts of interest, he served on a different ship, CSV Starwolf. Starwolf? But wasn't that one of the... Yes, one of the few we lost over Yadrani. Anyway, her husband tried to call her during the battle when Starwolf suffered a massive hull breach. She just ignored it. Said that she had no time to spare and that such conversation would break her concentration. He tried calling her again on personal comm shortly before Starwolf went down, but she blocked the signal again. I see. Cold. But some would say that such ability to detach from personal feelings during combat is a very good quality for a commanding officer. And what you would say? That what you just told me was a bit terrifying. But I'm a politician, not a soldier, so I may not be the best authority on the matter. Still, she was under your command for years. Surely you know how to talk to her by now. I don't think anyone knows how to talk to her. But alright, I'll call her as soon as we are done here. What's next on the list? Shipwright reports. And you're not gonna like this one. Salutations, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to Second Chance. Unfortunately, we return in a rather difficult time, as right now being part of the Commonwealth isn't too healthy. Because, as you remember from the previous episode, a few weeks ago, 3 of our neighbors, Zrakan Union, Kingdom of Yadra and Yanari League, have declared a joint war on us. And in fact, we believe that it's the machinations of Yanari League that are responsible for that declaration. For one, they were the ones who actually delivered it, but there's another, far more important reason. While While Yadrans and Zrakan want to retake planets they have lost to us, directly or otherwise, the League decided to go straight for our heart, Ortus. And not just that, because, to our surprise, they also demanded from us to hand over planet of Katanab, which was originally a Yadran world, but is now inhabited mostly by immigrants from Fethgran Union, who fill in the empty space that was left after Billy 1 swarms killed most of original population. And that detail is perhaps the most incriminating piece of evidence we have. It's rather improbable that the kingdom would have agreed to such a deal, especially since some of their people still live on Katanab, unless their leadership was in some way indebted to the League. And since we know that there's been a recent change in Yadran leadership, our intelligence division believes that this new empress of all Yadrans might have actually been placed on the throne by the Yanari agents, a development that doesn't bode well for anyone, even Yadrans themselves. Now, fortunately though, we are not alone in this conflict. In fact, we outnumber our enemies, in theory at least. Joining our side are two Shalani nations, their coalition and their free economic zone, and the Utkavongo sovereign stars. But while we do have 3 allies in this war, it's clear that we are going to have to take on the brunt of enemy attack, for several reasons. The Utkavongo, as we learned last time, are still busy in the north helping automatons of Xenak Forge to survive the onslaught of these berserkers, an enemy far more dangerous and terrifying than those we have to face. Because of that, we should not expect the Utkavongo to help us, and in all honesty, asking for their help wouldn't even seem fair, as we already owe quite a lot to their people. As for the Shalani, they certainly are eager to fight for their egalitarian ideals, but they may not actually be that well equipped to do so. Because their nation is split into 2 entities, their efforts are divided, even though both of these states are friendly and cooperate with each other. The main problem here is the fact that each one of these 2 states feels its own separate fleet, and, as we learned in the past, the best way to deal with interstellar war is to simply mass all your armed forces in one place and destroy your opponent in a single decisive battle. Something that may be a bit harder to achieve if 1/3 of your forces are operating independently under a different officer. Now, of course, it doesn't mean that Shalani fleets won't work together. They are, after all, a militarized society, so they surely understand the value of concentrated force, but still it would be good to keep an eye on them, just in case they need support. Far more important issue, however, is the state of their fleet. While Shalani Navy is certainly well organized and maintained, it's actually not that impressive when it comes to raw firepower, roughly on par with Zrakan fleet that we fought around 2 decades ago. Again though, it's not really Shalani's fault. Their nation is rather small compared to ours, and it's stuck in a relatively safe corner of the galaxy, so a navy that may seem impressive to them isn't exactly something to brag about closer to galactic core. All that means that, while their support certainly is appreciated, we should not expect our allies to carry the day in this war. Once again, all will be up to our ingenuity and technological prowess. And our fleet, of course. Now, as you can see, Task Force Manticore has a new commanding officer, Admiral Satayesh Ibrahim, former captain of the very first destroyer we built, CSV Ruby, and in fact she is so used to operate on this ship that she transferred her command post there, unlike Lynn, who always resided on the largest vessel within our fleet. Over the past few months, when our navy was undergoing reorganization, she excelled in all tests in our newly formed academy, and because of that, and of course because of her first-hand battlefield experience, she was appointed as our newest admiral. And she's quite good at her job. For one, like Shulin before her, she understands the value of well-supplied fleet, but she is also highly skilled in all strategic and tactical maneuvers. In short, under Admiral Ibrahim's command, our fleet will be well-oiled, highly mobile force that should be able to strike at unsuspecting enemies and disappear before they can react. And, of course, because all the groundwork laid by people of the Phalanx Protocol, as long as our fleet remain within our borders, we should be able to link up to various Phalangite border stations and use them to support our fleet, mostly by boosting power of our targeting computers, or so we hope at least. Now, you might have also seen there that we have several new additions to our fleet, a number of ships led by a battlecruiser Winter Rose under command of Commodore Ironbark that arrived from our former protectorate, now part of the Commonwealth, the planet of New Beginning inhabited by Quadrillions. And since they are a fresh addition to our nation, let us take a closer look at them. First and foremost, like our Shalani neighbors, Quadrillions are fiercely independent, and if not for the fact that we are a democracy, they would never have agreed to becoming part of our nation. Secondly, they are, similar to humans, very inquisitive people, who try to experience the world for what it truly is, and as a result they are rather materialistic and calculating, which actually explains why they joined us, since it was the most logical decision at the time, considering that their other neighbor was the Zrakan Union. Now, as for their biology, they are certainly an interesting race. For one, they are, again like Zrakan, extremely strong, to the point that some of our earliest delegations suspected that some sort of behind-the-scenes trickery was used to increase their strength. But it was not the case. The Quadrillions really are strong, so much so in fact that in an arm wrestling contest between human in a power armor and regular Quadrillion, the alien will win almost every time. Secondly, and this is more of a psychological thing, these plantoids are very mobile and have a strong sense of wanderlust. A regular Quadrillion rarely stays in one place for more than a few months, and some of their people even live on the road constantly, banded together into high-tech nomadic societies, and now, for the first time, they can wander beyond their own planet, something that they will certainly enjoy. And in fact, they actually seem to be extremely well suited to space travel. Ever since they developed first flying machines, many Quadrillions took their wandering spirit to the skies, which gave them a certain degree of skill when it comes to maneuvering in 3 dimensions. And then, several decades later, they learned that, long time ago, before they evolved sentience, their ancestors actually could fly, and when they took to the skies, some forgotten part of their brains made them immediately adept at aerial maneuvers, which is a skill that is instantly useful for anyone serving in space. Sadly though, there are some downsides. For one, Quadrillions aren't that great when it comes to various biological studies, as evident by their very late discovery of their own evolutionary line. But far more importantly, their society is dominated by peer pressure. For some reason, these powerful, wandering pilots are completely unsuited to any form of confrontation, and they tend to back down from conflicts extremely quickly, a fact that allowed our diplomats to bring them into our nation in the first place. So, while they may be good pilots, they will actually make very poor soldiers. Shame, considering that their strength would be very useful now. Still though, perhaps one day we may be able to help them overcome their timidness, and the sooner the better, because we're going to need every single citizen to work together in this war. Fortunately though, we are not as defenseless as we once were. Over the last few years, our phalangites, as we call border guards and all personnel that operates under Phalanx Protocol, have secured extensive government funding that allowed them to greatly expand their operations and, crucially, build a large number of new defensive stations. And now, thanks to their efforts, the majority of our inhabited systems are fortified in a similar way that we once fortified Nigel system. So, to sum it up, each of Phalangite protected systems now should have 3 defensive platforms, one of each type. Berlin-class to help our own ships with navigation, Hanover-class to pull potential enemies from warp, and Königsberg-class to reduce effectiveness of their deflector shields once they're pulled into a trap. And, of course, every single one of our planets has a spaceport right now, some small and some large, but it means that most of our inhabited systems are protected by 4 military stations, and because of the way we built our defenses, said stations are extremely durable and should be able to hold their own against any enemy, at least until reinforcements arrive. The only problem is that we were not able to fortify all of our systems. Now, while the border ones, like Aramathi or Yadran space, are protected, there is a number of our very core systems that remain undefended, Asha, our home among them. To be honest, Phalangites have not expected an attack from the west. They thought that Yanari were broken after the defeat against Thaler and some Griffins, so now we're going to have to walk fast to remedy that. After all, Yanari fleet could reach Ortus without encountering even a single defensive station on their way. Sure, our fleet may be there now, but sooner or later it will have to move out, and our people, and our trade and supply lines, must be protected before that happens. Next, we will have to deal with another problem, severe lack of ground forces. Up until now, most of our planets had no permanent garrisons. It was up to our rangers and our bracers and our overseers to keep the peace. Only Ortus and Curaçao had regular garrison forces, and, as you may remember, in case of Curaçao, those defenses were deployed there purely by mistake. Now, such lack of defenses might have worked when we had to face only a single enemy, but now when we can get attacked from 3 directions at once, it won't do. So, it's time to pour some resources into recruitment campaigns once again, but with so many planets to fortify, and with so many other projects we'll have to fund, those defenses won't be anything spectacular. But the official plan is this: each planet, and Inti Station, has to field at the very least 3 million armed soldiers as garrison forces, preferably of different races, to strengthen bonds between our people to ensure that, in unlikely case of enemy invasion, our foes won't be able to just walk in without any resistance. Of course, 3 million soldiers, even when backed up by local militias, probably won't be enough to defeat a true invasion force, but they could at the very least delay them until the rest of our troops show up. Not the most optimistic strategy, sure, but it's all we have. Still, as mentioned, ground invasion seems highly unlikely. Before committing to it, our enemies would first have to defeat our orbital defenses in our fleet, and that seems rather unlikely. We will also have to deal with our regular forces. Armies of Generals Branitsky and Telavin are still in Yadran space, and they can't move without support of our main fleet, since they may get intercepted and wiped out. Also, in case of Branitsky, he and his mechanized command are forcefully grounded. The Yadrans are still angry, so he and his forces need to stay there to quell the unrest. Otherwise, we may face a rebellion, which is the last thing we need right now. It may be that it will be up to Telavin and his regular infantry to serve on the front lines of this war. Let's hope they are up to the challenge. Now, speaking of Yadrans, or Cathemas to be precise, there is one unpleasant thing that we are forced to do. While some of the more open-minded of them have adapted to life in the Commonwealth, the sad truth is that the majority of them still despise living under our banners. And no wonder, considering all the ideological differences between our people. And while our xenology experts are certain that Cathemas will one day come around and learn how to live in democratic society, until that happens they remain a threat, both external and internal. And because of that, at least until the war is over, people of the Commonwealth decided to suspend voting laws for the former leaders of Kingdom of Yadra. They still have all other laws and responsibilities of other citizens, they simply can't vote. After all, it would be rather unwise to let a group that openly fights us to dictate how we should rule. At best, they could delay passing of important decisions. At worst, they could completely stunlock our entire internal decision-making process, or even play the system and force us to pass some unfavorable or outright dangerous legislations. So, once again, our democratic nation does something highly undemocratic, and let's face it, by suspending voting laws, we just set a dangerous precedent. Time will tell if this was a good decision. Good evening, Admiral. I'm calling to... Hold that thought, ma'am. Lieutenant Pesak, our third top vertical thruster is 0.3 degree off balance. Well, the fact that you can see it doesn't mean the problem doesn't exist. All it means is that I will have to hire a more competent chief engineer. Now get a team out there and fix it. And make sure you check if it isn't a design flaw, because that would mean our other ships may have the same problem. Right. Sorry about that. How can I help, Chancellor? At ease, Admiral Ibrahim. I'm no longer your commanding officer, so I'll make this quick. Just wanted to ask how goes your preparations? Slowly, especially now that every bloody politician calls me every few minutes to pester me with pointless questions. But worry not, I'll make sure the fleet is up to standards before we leave. I see. Wait, that's not Osiris's bridge. Are you still on Ruby? Yes, ma'am. Figured out it would be a smart move to transfer the command to one of the smaller, more maneuverable vessels, so I could easily move to where I'm needed. That, and it would also allow me to fully utilize our former flagship. No point keeping it in the back lines when its guns would be far more useful on the front. And finally, we could use it to throw our enemies off. By now, they probably expect one of our largest ships to be our flagship, so they shouldn't pay too much attention to a simple destroyer. Interesting tactics, Admiral. Just make sure you don't overextend. Our battle cruisers may be tough, but they're not invincible. I'm aware of that, ma'am. After all, I served in this fleet for a few years before. So, was there anything else? Because, in all honesty, I'm not sure why we both waste precious time with this conversation. No, I just wanted to tell you to take care, and to ask you to bring the fleet safely home. Thank you, ma'am. I appreciate that you consider me to be so incompetent that you feel obliged to remind me of my most basic responsibility. That's not what I meant. Perhaps, but let's not waste words here. I know you have an extremely low opinion of me, that you consider me a cold-blooded, emotionless butcher, but let me assure you that every decision I'll make out there will be made with the good of humanity, Commonwealth and the fleet in mind, in that order. Then I can ask for nothing more, Admiral Ibrahim. Good luck out there. Much appreciated, ma'am. Here's hoping we won't need it. And now, finally, for the most important part, the fleet, and the upgrades it will soon undergo in order to better prepare us for the war. And in case of this particular war, we're actually going to reduce the firepower of some of our ships, namely our torpedo Akulos. Up until now, they were equipped with a torpedo launcher and a missile launcher, but because our main enemy in this war, the Yanari, who we expect to have the greatest fleet, is mainly using missiles as well, our naval command decided that it would be a good idea to find some way to counter them, and the cheapest way to do so is to simply replace that missile launcher on our torpedo boat with a point defense cannon that can be used to shoot down incoming projectiles. Now, the issue here is that each and every one of our new PD boats will only have one of these cannons, but because they are relatively cheap, our shipyards should be able to build a great number of them without issue, which of course will also mean that we'll have absolute ton of torpedoes to fire at the enemy. And even though they may not be too accurate, if we'll be able to fire 50 plus of them every few seconds, then at the very least some of them should hit, and that is enough to deal considerable damage. Next, we'll upgrade our destroyers, though, as we will learn very soon, this upgrade is mostly theoretical at this point. Still, with new construction techniques, we are now able to not only add another weapon battery, a plasma accelerator, but we can also mount more efficient reactor cores, which will allow for better defensive systems, which should greatly increase the effectiveness of our destroyers. Overall, Zhrinsky Mark II should now be almost comparable to Lempitsky-class cruiser, while still being a lot cheaper, an important detail considering that these vessels are the mainstay of our navy. And finally, we can now also build a new class of vessel, the Faust-class light carrier. It is similar in design to our Osiris battlecruiser, but much lighter and cheaper because it's stripped of most of its armor to make space for 4 hangar bays. And in those 4 hangars, we are going to have 2 squadrons of bombers, 1 squadron of fighters, and 1 squadron of point defense fighters. The difference here is that while regular fighters are designed to fight other strike craft, PD fighters are developed with chasing and eliminating incoming missiles in mind, and as such they are much faster but carry less firepower. Still though, the main damage dealers will of course be our bombers, that, thanks to their small size, can go so close to enemy vessels that they should be able to completely ignore their shield. Now, of course there are problems with that. For one, strike craft can be destroyed by point defense weapons or hostile fighters, and when they are destroyed, they're gone, so while they may be able to deliver powerful attacks, they are also a bit of a glass cannon. And the second issue is that our people don't really have much experience when it comes to piloting starfighters. Up until now, we relied on regular large ships, so these newly formed squadrons won't have any real tactics developed for now. Until they get a few missions under their belts, we'll just have to use old Air Force manuals as main source of starfighter tactics. But, returning to the carrier itself, it's not actually designed as a combat vessel, it's more of a support craft, armed with 11 PD guns that it can use to completely negate enemy missile superiority. The idea behind that design is to ensure that the carrier itself stays out of trouble. After all, if we lose it, we also lose all the pilots and strike craft on board, so it's better for it to stay as far away from the enemy as possible. And between its PD guns and fighter squadrons, it should be able to eliminate 12 enemy missiles from combat every few seconds, severely reducing damage output of hostile fleets. All of a sudden, that Yanari fleet doesn't seem so menacing. But unfortunately, while our upgrades may seem impressive, actually installing them won't be that easy. One day, our naval engineers brought their plans to our shipyards. Then, the very next day, they received a return message containing estimated cost of enacting their plans, and immediately their hair turned white. While respecializing our torpedo boats would be relatively easy and cheap, applying all the upgrades to destroyers would require our shipyards to, essentially, rebuild these ships from the ground up with far more expensive materials. And the cost of that would be astronomical. It would take us over a year to amass enough resources to fully retrofit our destroyers, and during that time all our other projects would have to be put on hold. So, as you might expect, our naval command decided to delay installing those upgrades. For now, we will only retrofit our corvettes, while the rest of our fleet will remain untouched. Truth is that while these new model destroyers would surely be useful, we simply do not have time to wait, because our enemies certainly won't. So, we're just going to upgrade our torpedo boats, and as soon as that's done, Task Force Manticore will move out. The original plan developed by Naval Commandant Admiral Ibrahim was to divide and conquer. Our enemies were separated, so the idea was to try and attack them one by one, starting with the weakest one, the Yadrans, whose fleet is laughably small compared to ours. To do that, Task Force Manticore moved to Merinnia's system, but before it could jump to Zarmathon, a new Yadran capital, we received some grim news. The Radiant host was spotted once again, as it was moving into a border system of Rurius. And we quickly realized that our flowery enemies have not wasted these last decades, as their fleet was much larger than before, with 50 corvettes forming the bulk of it. To make matters worse, we were also outnumbered when it came to capital ships. We had the same amount of battle cruisers, 4 of them, but the host had 14 regular cruisers to our 8, so our only advantage here were, once again, our destroyers. But that was not the end of bad news. Our forward observation stations managed to scan Zrakan fleet with relative ease, and in doing so we uncovered their destination, the Aramathi colony of Tantra-Gul. It seems that the Union will once again try to bring the Aramathi into their nation, but this time, hopefully, we'll be able to prevent them from enslaving an entire race. Fortunately though, Fidelam's system has been fortified, so it has 3 defensive platforms and a spaceport protecting it. And, most importantly, one of our stations should be able to redirect enemy fleet and lead them right into the middle of our kill zone. Sadly though, that should turn out to be the most important ward there.
No, tell him that the state will reimburse his business for any losses this operation may cause, but no matter how much he complains, his ship is still confiscated until the end of evacuation. And you can tell the exact same thing to the rest of them in the line. We don't have time for arguing with every single pilot on this station right now. Now, hold all my calls, I have Captain of one of our defensive platforms on the line. Yes, hello Captain. Care to explain what's going on? I thought the idea of this interdictor station was to make sure our enemies won't be able to just make a move straight for our civilians.
In theory, yes. Turns out it's a bit more complicated than we initially expected though, especially considering that we use it for real for the first time here. My engineers are already on the case, so we should at least know what went wrong there, but even in the worst case you should have at least a few days to prepare. How does it look on your end anyway?
How do you expect it looks? We have a station-wide panic here, an enemy fleet about to show up right on our doorstep, and not enough ships to get all civilians to the surface before we run out of time. All because you people couldn't do your job properly.
I already told you we don't know what went wrong. Interdictor worked fine during tests, but this time, as soon as we locked onto Zrakan fleet, there was some sort of interference that altered their course. Maybe they somehow realized what we were doing and they managed to counter it. Maybe we simply miscalculated their speed, since they seem to be using different engines than last time. But it doesn't matter right now. They're coming and we need to prepare.
Easy for you to say when you're not the one who will have to take on their entire fleet.
I know. Look, we'll do our best to keep this under control. My people and I are already trying to fix the interdictor, and I'm currently transferring all of my ships to you to help with evacuation. Same with other platforms.
It's not enough. Even with your patrol craft and freighters, I won't be able to evacuate everyone in time. And it's only a matter of time before people here will realize it, and then we're going to have complete chaos on our hands.
That's what we've been trained for, Commander. Don't worry, help is coming, so we just have to hold on for... Wait, hold on a sec. Are you sure? Are you absolutely sure? Damn. Okay, Sergeant, secure station access logs and put quarantine in effect. Quietly, if possible. Sorry, Commander, it seems we have a new problem.
What is it?
As I said, there was some interference that messed our interdictor. Up until now, we assumed that it came from outside, but our latest scans picked up its origin point. It's within my station.
Sabotage? But who would do such a thing? Surely no one is foolish enough to buy that nonsense Zrakan are preaching.
Maybe they took a page from our book and used some unmanned spy drones, since they are much harder to detect. Now, whether this spy is organic or not, we have to find them before they cause even more damage. And damn, I won't be able to send my ships to help you because the agent may try to use them to escape. I'm placing my entire station under quarantine until the fleet can get here and take over investigation.
Understandable. I'll warn other stations to keep watch for potential agents as well. Damn, last thing we need right now is some brainwashed Zrakan spy.
As I said, it may not be a spy, or at least I hope that this is the case. Still, one thing is odd here. If they know about our interdictors, and if they have means to alter how they work, then why come here in the first place? So, the good thing is that we know for sure that our FTL interdictors work. The bad thing is that they don't exactly work as we wanted them to, and instead of directing enemy fleet into a kill zone between stations, the Radiant host was pulled very close to spaceport above Tantra-Gul, and while it may be well armed, it still is primarily a civilian facility, not really suited for taking on an entire armada, which became evident as soon as Radiant host showed up. Within few seconds, almost all of our civilian ships have been wiped out, and once that was done, Zrakan ships immediately focused their fire on the spaceport, making further civilian evacuation impossible. But despite these grim news, there is actually a positive side to this situation. By focusing on the spaceport, our other platforms will be able to operate without interruption, and, as we know, all of them have some beneficial effects. Interdictor Station not only pulled enemy fleet out of the warp, it also overloaded their engines, which effectively prevents their escape. Our navigation platform will allow our reinforcements to arrive on the scene faster, while also helping our civilians to get out of the system as quickly as possible. And, of course, our dampener station will constantly jam enemy deflector shields, preventing them from operating at full capacity. So, all in all, it's not a bad setup for this fight, at least from purely militaristic point of view. Not so good for all the civilians trapped on the spaceport though. Still, no matter how resilient our stations may be, it's obvious that they won't be able to hold enemy fleet by themselves, but as you can see, we now have a bit more firepower at our disposal. The cavalry has arrived and Task Force Manticore is ready to help out in this fight. Sadly though, while Admiral Ibrahim and her formation arrived as soon as they were able, they were still too late for Tantra-Gul's spaceport. In theory, the Zrakan should turn around and face our fleet, because it's far more dangerous than our stations, but it's clear that our zealous enemies were committed to their plan. And, as massed fire from their lasers finally overloaded the shields of our port, the fate of the station was sealed. Bit by bit, enemy energy weapons carved chunks of the hull of the station, and soon the entire structure just fell apart, and all escape pods and civilian vessels that tried to flee were completely annihilated. But it was no time for mourning. With our spaceport destroyed, Radiant Host finally divided its firepower, focusing mostly on our navigation and shield dampening platforms, clearly aware that their presence boosts our fleet while making their own weaker. But here is where all the preparations made by our Phalangites really paid off, as our defensive platforms withstood incoming fire far better than on civilian base. Even when they lost their shields, the armor plating and modular structure allowed commanders of each station to keep fighting, and slowly, shot by shot, they fought back against overwhelming tide, buying Manticore more time to get into position and relieve them. But the battle still was fierce. Once Commander of Radiant Host realized that they can't escape, now that our interdictor station was protected by our fleet, they ordered their captains to fight with extreme recklessness, and, true to their fanatical nature, Zrakan captains obeyed, and they immediately threw all caution out of the window and instead focused on dealing as much damage as they possibly could, following the same tactics as they used during battle above New Sajar all those years ago. Once again, our captains learned a hard lesson. It doesn't matter how advanced and powerful your ship is, it doesn't matter how much better your deflectors and your guns are when compared to similar enemy vessel. None of that matters when you have 50 enemy ships firing around 200 guns at you, and only you in unison. It's almost weird that our own officers aren't using that strategy. Regardless, it means that soon our formation started to take losses, and while we fought back just as hard, every ship we lost meant less firepower, which will make this battle even longer. Also, in the heat of the fight, our new allies had their first chance to prove their mettle in space combat. And, true to their nature and our expectations, the Quadrillions turn out to be stars of this engagement. Their pilots have shown almost unnatural ability to adapt to the ever-changing situation and responded to emerging threats with the speed and skill of seasoned veterans. They made some mistakes, of course, because they lack experience of our long-time crews, but their actions on the battlefield saved lives of many during this day. But perhaps most importantly, we have learned that Quadrillion unwillingness to engage in conflict almost completely evaporates during space battles. Maybe their natural love of flying simply overloads it. Maybe they realize that, unlike when fighting on land, they have nowhere to flee. After all, they have only their ship between them and deadly void of space. The reason doesn't matter though. What matters is that our new allies have proved themselves to be capable Marines, truly earning their place in the Commonwealth. But unfortunately, not everything went so well. At the beginning of the battle, Admiral Ibrahim detached two of our battlecruiser, Hathor and Osiris, our former flagship, and sent them around enemy formation in a flanking move, in order to divide attention of Zrakan ships. And it worked. Thing is, it worked too well, and soon both our battle cruisers found themselves under fire of almost entirety of the Radiant host, and under such an overwhelming barrage they were wiped out. CSV Hathor took a hit right into reactor core and exploded without giving even a single one of its 900 crew members a chance to evacuate. Worse still, the explosion completely scrambled electronic devices on board of Osiris, which meant that the crew of our former flagship was also unable to abandon ship. Soon, it too exploded, taking down all its crew. Of 1,800 people that served on board of these two vessels, not a single one survived, but at the very least their sacrifice was not in vain. Because while Zrakan vessels were busy targeting our battle cruisers, the rest of our fleet blew their ships out of the sky one by one, until finally, nearly 11 hours after the battle started, the last of Zrakan ships, a cruiser, disappeared under a barrage of missiles, kinetic rounds and plasma fire. The Battle of Tantra-Gul was won, and, by military standards at least, it was an overwhelming victory for us. Radiant Host has been eliminated to the last ship, and, because their crews never evacuate, even to the last man. In a single day, Zrakan military power simply ceased to exist, but the price for that victory was high. Aside from our 2 battle cruisers, we lost 23 of our 32 corvettes and 5 destroyers. As for the stationary defenses, our spaceport has been completely destroyed, and with it one of our platforms, Berlin-class, the one equipped with navigation beacon, which, while it may sound cold, is actually a good thing. If we lost any of our other stations, Radiant Host would either be able to escape, or they would fight even harder with their shields fully operational. Still, it was our worst space battle when it comes to casualties. While our military lost around 4,700 people, 4,400 from our fleet and 300 from our defense platform, it was the number of crew and civilians from the spaceport we lost that is truly terrifying. Nearly 40,000 people, and only less than 1,000 of them were soldiers. Still, as was said, at least their sacrifice was not in vain, because by winning this battle, we effectively removed Zrakan's ability to wage any further war. Even if they start rebuilding right now, they probably won't be able to construct a proper fleet before the end of this conflict. And even though they may still have extensive land forces, with no ships to protect them, they will remain grounded. So, one enemy down. Only question is, can we still take on the other 2? Sadly though, we may not have a choice in the matter, as few months after Battle of Tantra-Gul, our long-range sensors picked up Yanari fleet moving into our territory, and if the Radiant Host was impressive, then these so-called malevolent star hunters are downright terrifying. See, while Zrakan were mostly focusing on smaller ships, Yanari slavers clearly think that larger means better, and their navy is mostly composed of cruisers and destroyers, with only a handful of corvettes running escort duty. Fortunately, and surprisingly though, this fleet seemed uninterested in engaging us in combat, as it moved into an empty system within our borders. And when we listened into their transmissions, we learned that their orders were even weirder. Instead of fighting us, Yanari fleet was, apparently, on its way into the middle of Zrakan space. But as we learned exactly why they were following such an odd course, our relief disappeared almost immediately. The slavers weren't ignoring us, they were moving into Zrakan space to engage our Shalani allies, who gathered their fleets there in an attempt to capture one of Plantoid planets, a tomb world called Queni-Girgam. And when our officers ran the simulations, it became obvious what Yanari plan was. Even combined, Shalani fleets were no match for malevolent hunters, and because that world they were besieging was far away from our borders, and by extension from our wormhole generators, we had no means of sending our own navy there to support them. So, in short, Yanari had the same idea as we did. Instead of fighting us in a pitched battle, they decided to first take on our allies to weaken overall power of our coalition. So, as soon as we learned that, a warning message was sent to Shalani High Command asking them to retreat and, if possible, regroup with Task Force Manticore so we could take on this slaver fleet together. And that was when the first major problem appeared. The Shalani refused, claiming that their land forces were already on their way and that their fleet will surely be able to take the Yadrani out if we're too scared to fight them. And while we certainly could fight to try to stop them, in this case the outcome was simply too difficult to predict. On paper, our fleet is stronger than Yanari one, but considering their navy has a clear advantage when it comes to number of capital ships, it may turn out that our advantage is nothing more than an illusion. Worse still, the slavers appear to have some knowledge of our territory, as their fleet moves through our space carefully, avoiding systems where our defenses are located. and as their navy starts moving into Quadrillion system of Chetras, it becomes clear that this will be our last chance to intercept them. If we won't stop the Yanari now, they will simply move into Zrakan territory and out of our reach, and we won't be able to build new wormhole generators in time to help our Shalani allies if they won't abandon their siege. So, knowing that Admiral Ibrahim immediately ordered her fleet, which was resting and repairing in orbit of New Sajar, to move to Chetras. We may not have a fully developed defensive system there, but it's still better than nothing. And because everybody loves cliffhangers, we will see just how this interception will go in the next episode of Second Chance. Professor, could you please stop that racket? It's a bit difficult to focus here with you running around like crazy.
I'm sorry. It's just that any minute now I should receive a confirmation from one of my contacts from Redamon, and it makes me want to sing from excitement.
Please don't. I'd like to retain the use of my ears. But I'll admit you have my attention. Care to share what got you so pumped?
Only one of the major breakthroughs since Department of Xenoanthropology was established, my friend. But I really shouldn't brag about it until I can prove my hypothesis, just in case it may be wrong. Nothing more embarrassing than an overzealous researcher who publishes his findings without enough proof, am I right, Captain?
Correct. Well, sure, but if you're just one step from confirming it, then I'd say you could at least tell us here what got you so riled up.
Oh, alright. I mean, if that's alright with you, Captain.
Go ahead. Gee, boss, don't get too overexcited here. I get it you didn't want this job, but...
It's no problem, my friends. No problem at all. So, anyway, here's what I found. Over the last 3 years, I've been investigating a certain Yadran legend, or Catheman legend to be perfectly precise. And it's an old one, from early Bronze Age, believe it or not, so it's a miracle it was even preserved to our times. But its age is not most important here, but the tale itself. It's a long, rhymed story about a great Catheman warlord who traveled far and wide on a quest to unite fractured kingdoms of his people. And he needed to unite them because their world was dying. An angry, evil god was sending plague after plague at Catheman people because they dared to worship his good and benevolent sister instead of him. Then there's a long part that describes just how hostile the world was. Monsters the size of buildings roamed the land, scorching heat in summer and freezing cold in winter, ruined crops and caused countless of Catheman deaths, either by elements or starvation. Tornadoes and hurricanes ravaged the land, and great forests were laid down by fires and extensive droughts. Anyway, the next chapter is an epic tale about that warlord overcoming great many difficulties that finally ends when he brings last of the wayward kings into the fold, and crowns himself as a first Catheman emperor. And here's when it gets interesting. The emperor has united his people, but the evil god still tries his best to kill them. So, in a moment of bravery, genius, or pure bloody insanity, the emperor decides to kill the god itself. But there's an issue. The god is a son, just like his sister. What follows then is a tale of journey. The emperor gathers his people, all of them, and embarks on a great adventure to bring the murderous deity to justice for all the pain he caused, and to find a new place where they could live, one that wasn't already devastated. And that's when it all gets metaphysical, so to speak. But the end result is this. The emperor fights the blue sun god in a pitched battle in heavens and manages to win, while his people continue their search for the promised land. Their leader returns to them and claims that, as thanks for eliminating her bloodthirsty brother, the benevolent goddess told him of an untouched valley he could use to rebuild his people. He leads them there, as described in the legend, in a journey under 1,000 stars, and when they finally reach the valley, it's exactly what was promised. A calm, silent place where his people can rebuild in a temperate climate. And to make things even better for them, they are rewarded by a servant people who toil in Catheman fields and who build Catheman homes, and who will always and forever serve those who saved them from the clutches of a mad god. There, do you see now why I'm so excited about it?
Yes. Bloody hell, how is it possible we missed that story in our earlier research? It has Exodus written all over it.
Truth is, most Cathemas don't really want to work with you, friend. Not yet. They're a bit more eager to share with us, though, especially those refugees who settled on Redamon Prime. My contact is one of their scholars, actually. Anyway, you're right. On its own, the tale could probably be dismissed as just a legend, but paired with our knowledge and history of both our races, it really seems like proof that Cathemas themselves are not native to their homeworld, just like us. Only thing is, to us, this exodus happened when we were already technologically technologically advanced enough to preserve our knowledge, but if something similar would happen to a primitive civilization, it would naturally turn into a legend. And, oh, here's the message. Now we'll see if my assumptions were right.
And, come on, don't keep me waiting.
I was right. The confirmation I needed is right here. Look, this is a picture of a stone tablet that supposedly presents the first emperor during his coronation. Note the two sons and ask yourself, where is the other one? Masaka only has one today. Then, this is a crude map of the valley that Emperor's followers settled after their journey. Seems exactly like that crater on Yadrani's northern hemisphere. But here's the most important part, archaeological data. According to this, Yadran researchers were, for years, baffled by seeming lack of the previous links on their evolutionary tree. There is just nothing on Yadrani that would suggest that Cathemas have evolved there, while there's plenty of evidence for all other native life, including the Uvanics.
So you were right. Somehow, thousands of years ago, Catheman people traveled from a different world to here. Or perhaps were transported. We have to get this to the Science Council. They're gonna... Captain? I'm sorry, but I cannot allow you to do this. What are you talking about, boss? I'm saying that this information cannot leave this ship. You are not yet ready to understand it. What? Look, boss, I know you've been having a hard time lately with your son out there fighting, but...
Stand back, she's got a gun!
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Computer, erase all data banks. Authorization code CP-028.
Affirmative, Captain. Databanks wiped.
Good. Now call for help. We need help. You must enact Purging Protocol Gamma.
Warning, there are still 11 life forms on board of this ship. I cannot enact emergency venting without a valid reason that will be recorded on the black books.
Of course. The ship and the crew were compromised by a hostile force. Emergency venting is the only way to ensure critical data won't fall into enemy hands.
Acknowledged. Beginning Purging Protocol Gamma. Before that happens, you must state who the ship was compromised by.
Oh, you poor machine. This vessel and all on board of it were taken over by the darkness on the very day of creation. Now engage!